Hey everyone, in today's video we are going to add some updates to our weather app. So I created this app initially over a year ago, and since then people have been telling me that there were some problems. So I knew there would be some issues with this app because I just made it in a very straightforward way just to demonstrate the API. But of course you can always extend an app, you can always make it better. So what I'm going to do in this video is add some changes to make it a little better. So what I plan on doing is making sure you can't add duplicate cities. So right now you can add like Seattle again. Another thing I'll do is make sure that the city actually exists before committing it to the database. That way you don't get errors when the data returns from the API because the city doesn't exist. I'll add some messages for when you add a city or you get an error message when you can't add a city because it doesn't exist or it already exists in the database. And then finally, I'll add something to delete cities that you've already had added to the database before. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the code that I have. This is the exact code that I finished off with in the previous video. So I'm just picking up where I left off. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to do something that makes this a little bit easier to run. So I'm going to create a flask-env file. So let me just close this out and create a new file called .flask.env. And I'm just doing this so I can have a place to put the Flask app, which is app.py, and flask-env, which is development, so I get debug mode. So I'll save that. And then once you do that, you have to install python.env. So pip install python-.env, just like that. So I'll go ahead and install that. And then once that is done, I should be able to run the app with just Flask run, and it should be in development mode to start with because I have the development as the Flask environment here. So this should only take one more second. And another thing I'll do is I will add a configuration for flask-sqlalchemy track modifications, just so that goes away. So flask-sqlalchemy track modifications. We'll set this to false, just so the message goes away. So if you look here, here's the message. Just to make this warning go away, I'll set it to false because I won't be using it. So set that to false. And then the python.env library has finished installing. So I'll run the app again. Okay, so we see the environment is development, the app is running, debug mode is on. So I just refresh that and everything works. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to cover the case for duplicate cities. So as an example, let's add Seattle again. So Seattle and then add city. And now I see Seattle twice. So Seattle, Seattle. What I want to do is I want to prevent Seattle from being added again or any other city if it already exists in the database. So what I need to do is first check the database to see if a city exists when I go to add it. If it does exist, then just return like an error message. So to begin with this, what I want to do is I want to actually break up this one route into two. So right here, I have this one route that has get and post, and it's not too long, but I want to make it a little shorter. So what I'm going to do is just copy the whole thing and then place it underneath. And then for one, I'll make it for get requests. So since get is the default method, I'll just remove this and I'll change the name of the function to index get so it doesn't collide with the other one. And I'll remove the block for the post request. So all that is for the post requests. And then that is for get. And then I'll do the same thing for this one except for post. So I'll take out the get part here. I'll change this to index post. I'll leave the post section and delete the get section. So just delete all that. And I can remove this if statement because I don't need to check if it's a post request anymore because it should be. And then just move the indentation over for these few lines of code. And then finally, I want to redirect to the index get. So here I'm just returning the template. What I need to do is redirect to the index get function. So this route with a get request. So redirect URL for index get. And then I can remove this line because I don't want to render the template anymore in the post method. It gets rendered in the get. So I just need to add in redirect and URL for, and all of this should work. So I just saved it and let's make sure the new changes work. So I'll refresh the page. Let's say Paris, add city, and we see Paris at the bottom. So now what I want to do is do the duplicate city check. So like I said, I want to make sure that the same city doesn't get added twice. So I need to make this check inside of the post route when the city goes to be added. So first, let me start by removing the duplicate that I added already. So I'll open up the database, SQLite weather.db, and then select star from city, which is the table name. So we see Seattle is number 1 and number 5. So I'll just delete number 5. So delete from city where ID equals 5. So now if I select star from city again, 5 is gone. So when I run the app, we shouldn't see Seattle here. It should go Shanghai and then Paris. So Shanghai, Paris. Okay, so the second Seattle is gone. So now what I want to do is in here, I want to check to see if the city already exists in the database. So what I can do is I can query the database first before adding the city. And if it doesn't exist, the result, then I can simply go ahead and add the new city like I'm doing here. So what I'll do is this part. So inside of the if statement, so this is checking to see if the user actually sent something. Then I'll say new city. So city dot query filter by name equals new city. So this is going to check to see if the new city is in the database. I want to get the first result if it exists. So let's call this existing city. So now if the city exists, then this existing city variable will have something in it. So if it does have something in it, then I don't want to do anything. And I'll say if not existing city, I'll indent this and I'll add an else block for a future error message. So in here, I'll create a variable called error message, set it to be an empty string. And here I'll say for the error message, city already exists. Okay, so we won't see this error message yet, but eventually I'll use it. So here what happens is if the existing city is there, then don't do anything and just create this error message. If the existing city doesn't exist, meaning this is a new city, then go ahead and add it to the database. So let's try this out. So refresh and let's try adding Seattle again. So because I don't have any kind of message that appears, all that will happen is it will reload the page and then nothing happens. So if I do Seattle, I don't see Seattle again. So let's try London. And I don't see London when the page returns. If I try a completely new city, let's say Tokyo, when it returns, I see Tokyo down here. So we know the duplicate check is now working. So like I said, what it's doing is it checks to see if the city is in the database first. If it is, just create an error message. If it doesn't exist, then add the new city into the database, just like before. So now that we have that, next thing I want to do is check to see if a city is actually valid. So if I typed in something like this, and we'll see this break. So just type in some random characters and hit add city. I get this key error main. And the reason why I get this key error main is because when the page goes to load in the data from the API, it's trying to search for that city that I just typed in. It doesn't find it, so the API can't return city data, it returns something else. So to start, we'll see what the API returns. So in here, inside of my for loop here that goes over the cities, I'm going to print out the results and we'll just inspect it as it happens. Okay, so here's the error, but if I scroll up a bit, we see all this data. So this is the city data. So the first few cities are fine. It's the last city that doesn't work. So we see down here, we see this last JSON object that has COD 404 and then message city not found. So what we can do is we can take that message COD 404 and we can determine if the city is there or not. So the first thing that I want to do to use this is I want to create a function that calls the API given a city name, because right now The API only gets called within the index, which is fine for displaying the data, but I need to verify if the city exists in the first place. So I think it's better to do that before I add the city to the database instead of doing it every time the main page runs. So what I'll do is I'll create a function that gets the data for the cities. So I'll call this get weather data, and it will take a city, and it's going to have the URL, so here. And then it's going to have that request again, so this one. And it's going to return the response as a JSON object, which is what that .json is doing. So to modify this a little bit, what I want to do is I want to pass in the city here. So I can just make this an F string and put city here. Okay, so that takes care of the city part. Now I need to change the URL part here. So right here, it's url.format city name. Instead, I'll just pass in URL because the URL now has the city in it because it's an F string. And I simply return R. So I'm going to use this in place of the URL here. So I can actually delete this. And then here's where it gets called. So if I just use get weather data and then pass in the city, so city.name, which comes from this for loop, and then set it to the same variable R, I'll get the same result. So I'll remove that get request, and then everything should work the same. So let's run the app again. It's going to fail, but I'll remove that fake city from the database. So SQLite weather.db, select star from city, and then I'll remove number 8. So delete from city where ID equals 8. So if I do this again, we see that the fake city is no longer there. So now when I run the app, it should work. And we know it's returning correctly because we can see the data here. Okay, so now that I have this function, what I want to do is I want to take that function and use it inside of the post route. So here's the post route to check to see if the city exists or not. So what I can do is here, before I add the city into the database, so new city object, I can check to see if the city actually exists. And if it does exist, then add it to the database. And if it doesn't exist, I can go ahead and do something like return another error message. So let's do that here. So what I'll do is this check. So first it checks to see if the city exists. And then I can check to see if the city is actually a city. So I can use that get weather data on the new city. So the new city is passed in from the form. And we'll call this new city data. And then remember that COD that I was looking at? So let's see if I can find it if I scroll up. The COD 404. So that's what I want to check. So I'll check a little more directly. I'll check for 200 because that's what it is in the case that it's successful. So I'll say if new city data COD, so this comes from the JSON object, equals 200, then you can go ahead and add the city. So I'll just indent this. And then if that code is not 200, if it's anything else, I'll set the error message to say something like city does not exist. So how about this? City already exists in the database. City does not exist in the world. Okay, so those are the two messages. And now this is the code to handle those cases. So same thing, when I try to run this, I should see really nothing, but it won't add it. So here we have Seattle to Tokyo. And if I add in just some random characters and hit add city, we see the page refreshes. It doesn't crash anymore, but it doesn't add that city to the database. So if I try that one more time, add city, we can see that it doesn't get added. So we know the validation is working correctly. So now that we have that, let's try adding an error message or a success message underneath this block here so we can give the user some feedback when they do add a city. So if it's successful, we'll say the city has been created or something like that. And if it's not successful, then we can pass that error message that we created back to the user so they can see it. So what we'll use for this is message flashing. But first thing I want to do is I want to set up some sections so we can see what it looks like first, and then I can add in the messages later. So I'm using Bulma for this project. So I'll just go to the documentation, and I believe I'm looking for notifications. So let's see, elements, notification. Yeah, so these are the notifications. So this is what they look like. So basically I want to have this red one for errors and this green one for success. So we see it's just a class notification is danger and so on. So I'll just copy this and add it to the template. So if I find where my input button is, I have the button along with the form input. So it should go underneath this div, I believe. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so yeah, it goes underneath the input in the button. So now I just want to change this up so there's no delete button, and we can put something like error message. Okay, so this is good. And then if I want it to be success, it should be green this time. Okay, so that's exactly what we need. So now I want to get the messages through message flashing. So what I'll do here is I'll say something like this. So if error message, I want to do one thing. And if there is no error message, then I want to do something else. So basically what I mean is if there's an error, I want to flash an error message. And if there isn't an error, I want to flash a success message. So first I'll import Flash. So if you're not familiar with Flash, basically what it does is it sends a message to the next route that gets called in your app. So when you're on the post route here, it will flash a message. And then since redirect goes to the index route for get, that's the next call. So that index route is going to get any flash messages from the previous route, which is this post one. So I'll say flash, and I'll flash the error message. So error message, and then I'll give this a category of error, and then else I'll flash city added successfully, just like that. And to use message flashing, you need a secret key, so I'll add that here. And this is a secret. Okay, so just like that. So now that I have the two flashes here, I can access them inside of the template. So inside of the template, what I need to do is I first need to get the flash messages, and then I have to loop over them to see what I have. So I'll just put that here, and it starts off with the with statement. So with, and I'll say messages equals get flash messages. And then this needs to have categories because I have either the error or success category. So with categories equals true. So that should be the with, just add the % there. And then I'll put the in with underneath this block here. So basically, if there are no messages at all, I don't want to display anything. If there is a message, then this div gets rendered. So that's why I put it in between these message tags or these with tags. And next thing I want to do is check to see if there are any messages. So if messages, and then indif here. And next I need to loop over the messages that I have. So for category and message in messages. So the reason why I'm using this is because it's a tuple that gets returned. It's the category first and then the message. So it's kind of like the opposite of this. So it's message, then category. In the template, it's the other way around. So I'll put the in for loop down here. And then what I want to do is I want to check to see which category it is. So one easy thing I can do is I can set the category to be, or I can pretend the category is going to be successful. And if it isn't successful, then I'll change something to be an error. So what I want to change is this is success to either is error or is success, depending on what happens. So I'll set, let's say message class equal to is success, just like that. And then I'll say if category is equal to air. So I'll just put the % there. And then indif. I'll set a message to be, the message class to be is danger. Okay, so let me just put some space in between this. Okay, so now that I have that, I can do the last part with the actual div itself. So this is going to be a variable now. It's going to be message class. And then the error message, so I'll put it here, is going to be message or the success message, depending on what happens. So now we bring that over. And let's indent this a little bit, just like that. Okay. So I actually want to indent everything here. And then indent the for loop. And then I'll leave the if on the same level as with. Okay. So just to recap, I'm looping over the category and messages in the messages that I get from get flash messages. And then I set a message class to be is success. So it starts off as that. If it's error, then it says it is danger. If it's actually success, then nothing happens. I add that message class to the class here in the HTML. And then I add the actual message itself here. All right, so let's try all of this out to see if it works. So it's my app running. I'll restart just to be safe. Okay, so run this. We see nothing here, so the if statement is working correctly. Let's try adding a bad city. Okay, so city does not exist in the world, which is good, and it doesn't get added. Now let's try adding something that already exists. Las Vegas. Add city. City already exists in the database. Okay, that's good. And then finally, I want to try adding a new city. So Bangkok. City added successfully. If I scroll down, I see Bangkok at the bottom. So we know our messages are working correctly. So the last thing I want to do is I want to add a delete button to all of these boxes so I can remove them from the database. So let's start by looking at BOMA to see where we can get this for the media object. So if I go to media object and layout, they should have an example. So here's one. So this delete is what I want. So they have the media right down here. So I'll go ahead and add this to my template. So I'll find the media. So I have the media article, and then it goes after media content. So just right here. And now let's run it. And we see the X's for the delete button. So now what I want to do is I want to link these to a route that will delete something. So I'll first create like a placeholder route, and then I'll fill it out a little later. So to begin, I need to create a third route. So I have two right now, one for get, one for post. What I want to do is I want to create one for delete. So down here, we'll say app routes delete, and then we'll have, let's say, the name of the city. So name. So this is going to delete whatever city name is passed here. So we'll call this delete city, and then return deleted city. And let's actually say deleted whatever the name of the city is. So deleted name, just like that. So this doesn't do anything yet. So if I go to /delete/London, I need to add the name as a parameter to the function underneath the route. So deleted London, so that works. So now I want to use URL for inside of the template to link to that. So I'll put a link around the button. So let me move that to another line. And the location of the link is going to be URL for delete city, which is the name of the function that we have here. And it's going to take in the name of the city. So weather.city, which comes from up here because I'm looping over weather in weather data. So that should work. So let's take a look. And expected token, so I'm just missing something. I'm missing, so URL for delete city, so that should have a quote, and then there should be a comma there. So city equals weather.city. So I think that looks better. So this is the name of the route, comma, the value that's going to be passed to the route. So the name of the parameter is name, so name and then weather.city. So that looks better. Let's try this. And this should actually be name, not city. So name, yeah, name. I don't know what I was thinking. So name, let's try that one more time. Okay, so we see that here. So now if we click on the link, let's say Paris, it says deleted Paris. And of course it didn't actually delete Paris. It just shows us this. I see there's an extra comma being sent. So is that from this? So let's try that out. So deleted Paris, deleted Bangkok. Okay, so it's passing an extra, not a comma, but so let's see. Weather.city is the name of the city. Let's add the slash there to see if it's a little better. Yeah, it's adding like an extra value at the end. So I'm not sure where that's coming from. It's adding this extra little quotes at the end. Okay, so it has to be coming from the URL for us. So let's look at this again. Oh yeah, so there's like a little stray quote mark there. So now let's try this one more time. Delete Shanghai. Okay, so deleted Shanghai. So now that we have all that, we can go ahead and actually remove it from the database. So inside of the route, what I want to do is first query for that city. So city equals city.query, filter by name equals name, and then give us the first result. Then I can use db.session.delete and pass that city to it and then commit it. Finally, what I can do is I can flash a message saying deleted that city. So flash successfully deleted blank. So I'll make this an F string and then we'll pass in the city. So city.name. And this is going to be a success message. And then instead of returning that, I'll redirect to the index. So redirect URL for index get. All right. And just a note here, even though I deleted city from the database, I can still access it because the object itself will continue to exist until this route is over. Once this returns, then I'll no longer have access to this particular city object. But as long as I'm still in the same route, the object itself exists even though the data was removed from the database. So that's why I can call city.name here after I do db.session.delete. So I believe that is it for deleting. So let's try it out. So now let's try deleting Seattle. So I'll click on the link. It says successfully deleted Seattle. And we see Seattle is no longer in the list. I can delete Paris, deleted Paris, Paris is gone, Shanghai, gone, Bangkok, gone, Las Vegas, gone, and so on. So of course you can now add and delete cities all you want to this, and you should not have any problems. So that's all I wanted to cover in this particular video. I'm thinking about in the next video adding like a user system to this. So instead of having one page where everybody can add their own cities here, instead you can have users log in and then they can create their own cities and they'll be separate from other user cities. So look out for that if I do create that video. Before I leave this video, I just want to tell you that I do have courses available on my site if you want to take something that's more structured than a YouTube video. So if you go to prettyprinted.com, you see the courses that I have here. If you can follow along with this video, then the best course for you will probably be the Flask extensions course. So if you just click on it, You'll get more information about it. You'll be able to see all the videos in it. It's like over 10 hours of videos, and it just covers different Flask extensions that may be useful. So Flask WTF, Bootstrap, Mail, and so on. And you can preview some of the videos as well if you want to see what they're like. So like the Flask Mail section here, you can just preview all the videos right here in your browser. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions about what I've done in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.